So I'm not sure there is a fundament. See, because in materialism is supposed to correspond to reality. And to me, I think reality is inherently complex, or perhaps you could say surreal. And I don't think we'll find that there is just a fundamental thing. On the other hand, I do believe that we'll continue to unify the theories that we do have. We might find that all the laws of physics that we know now do have a unifying principle. But I wouldn't be surprised at that point if we then found another area of physics that was not unified. So I kind of think that there's a potential to unify everything. But when you take infinity into account, the fact that there's a perpetual, as a skeptic, I believe there's always more questions. And so I would not be surprised if every successful unification is followed by a discovery of some area of physics that cannot be unified. And in spirituality, what is the most fundamental? What's the most fundamental thing? Well, actually, before I move on, so we don't have a single fundamental thing in materialism. And this is interesting. I think partly relativism, skepticism, are predictions that we won't find any single fundamental thing in reality. Reality will always break down in a complex way. You know, it's something, there's a flavor to the comprehensible and the material that includes, I think, the surreal and the incomprehensible. It's something about perhaps the limit of our minds compared to the universe, but also the fact that any mind, no matter how powerful, would be limited compared to the universe. And so while the universe is comprehensible in bits, I just don't see comprehending it all at once. So I think materialism will forever be seeking more fundamental things. Forever. That's my guess on that frame of reference. And in spirituality. Now, what are the fundamentals of spirituality? Well, this is where we get into what I was also saying about epistemology, is, of course, within a given frame of reference, there are lots of competing theories. In spirituality, obviously there is, there's a ton of competing ideas in the area of spirituality, many quite popular and influential, obviously. You, of course, don't have to keep a frame of reference. You can also have a separate debate about what the frame of reference should be. And in spirituality, there's a real question there of, is it even a real frame of reference? Is it just imaginary, like a lot of the theories of spirituality seem to be? And maybe, it's something that we would discuss altering the way we conceive of that frame of reference itself. When you're creating a new school of philosophy, one of the simplest things to do is just create your own frame of reference. Define your own frame of reference. Define from what and from where you are making your statements. The thing there is that often you will refer to frames of references that really are out there, that perhaps you even, discovered through your own experiences. So it might not really be as separate as you want. It can at least be a placeholder. In spirituality, a lot of people do this. They define the frame of reference and their system all at once, all together. But for me, I don't look at it that way. Being a materialist, having a skeptical epistemology, I want to look at the phenomena, spiritual phenomena. So the experiences that people have that they call spiritual, and what are those experiences really like, both for me and also trying to imagine based on what people tell me about their own spiritual experiences. And I do actually think I know something, some of the fundamentals of a spirituality, by which I mean that spiritual theories that I have personal respect for tend to involve these ideas I'm going to call fundamental. I think what's fundamental in spirituality is really two things. Might be a good time to mention, by the way, as a skeptic. Now, the skeptics were not like having the 10 Commandments. This was not the skeptic style. First of all, they usually call these lists pods because they're they're balanced thing. If you make a list of 5, it's supposed to be 5 things that are all in some sort of balance. And they would just have, the 5 podes or the 10 podes or the 3 podes or whatever, Let's make 7 of them. It's just like if you wanted to build a device, a balance, you could have 2 things balanced, but you could also have 3 little platters with weights balanced, or 4 or 5 or 10. And the point really is in the balance and the tension of the balance. So when I say there's 2, I'm not saying, oh, I really divided it down to 2, but I have noticed 2 very important things that are worth saying first in spirituality. And one of them is humility. I think most decent spiritualities, anyway, embrace humility in some way or other. I mean, if it's the ancient Greek myths, there's tons of myths about hubris and feeling that you were as sophisticated as a god or as skilled as a god. But I think you can see in lots of spirituality that if taken properly, this is why I'm throwing in these qualifiers, these sort of indistinct qualifiers like, decent, because, in Christianity, I think there are definitely things in the teachings of Jesus to say be humble, but of course there's lots of Christians that are not humble about those teachings. So I'm throwing in words like decent because I'm talking about, the decent people using spirituality. I'm putting a lot of my own, my own value system on that. But on the other hand, I think that most people can see what I'm talking about, that spirituality involves humility, okay? And then the other thing that it involves is a connection with the universe, which is why I, as an atheist, have been very interested in the spiritual experiences, because to me, it seems possible that, that the similar to the way that our genetic machinery gives us lust to help us procreate, and procreation's about families, and it's a beautiful thing, and I mean there's a certain worldly aspect to it, but there's also something sort of heightened about this experience of having a family and caring about creatures other than yourself, your children, and so you have an emotion like lust that's leading us towards something that actually has some more romantic kinds of, prettier ways to state the purpose than what you see directly in lust. Though I'm not knocking lust, I think that's fine too, but it sometimes makes people go crazy and they do crazy things. So to me, I wonder if the genetic machinery hasn't given us this urge to have spiritual experiences, again, for something more lovely, really, than just the simplistic view of that feeling of oneness, of la la la, where there can be kind of a cheap spirituality. And just like there can be cheap experiences if the lust is taken too directly. Whereas if it's really lived with well, and the purpose of the lust is fulfilled, and you do procreate, and you're involved in all of that, and then you'll see this other story. And I think, well, if the spiritual sense succeeds, and you actually find a spiritual path, then no, it's not just being able to believe whatever you want or get blissed out, but it is about this feeling of connection. To me, this works well with my relativistic epistemology, because with a relativistic epistemology, the only way you can have a morality is with reference to your frame of reference, which ultimately you're limited, at least at first, to your own frame of reference, in the sense that the only frame of reference I can really insist I know you have is your frame of reference where you get your perceptions. Now, I can also probably assume that you love your family and your grandma, and I can say, well, use that as a frame of reference. But some people say, well, no, I don't love my family, or they'll say, yes, I do, but I'm still not going to use that as my frame of reference. So the problem is, well, how in this morality do you get people to want to have a bigger frame of reference? My morality works fine if somebody accepts that they are part of a family of living creatures in the biosphere of the earth. Then you can derive all the moral laws of man, environmentalism, there's a lot of things you can derive. But how do you get somebody out to having this expanded frame of reference? And I think the answer is spirituality. And I think the clue to that not just being a blissful wish on my part is that spiritual experiences tend to have to do with a feeling of connection and connectivity with the things around you, a sort of harmonious connectivity. And even seeing the tragedies as somehow part of life and also connected to this whole, which on the whole you can embrace.